Alright, aviation fans, buckle up, because we're not just flying today. Nope, we're gliding back into an era when air travel meant velvet seats, 5-star dining at 30,000 feet, and lounges in the sky. This isn't your cramped economy flight with pretzels and plastic cups. We're diving into the golden age of aviation luxury, where every flight was an experience, and every plane was a palace. From flying yachts to airborne cocktail lounges, these vintage aircraft didn't just carry passengers, they carried style. Let's board the most luxurious vintage planes ever built. Okay, to truly appreciate just how grand this plane is, we have to do a little time traveling. Because the Boeing 307 Stratoliner came from a time when luxurious flying was beyond anything we know today. I mean, this plane was quite literally a flying penthouse in the sky, before that was even a concept. It wasn't just a plane, it was a pressurized promise that luxury and altitude could go hand in hand. And it was a promise that delivered. When it was first introduced in 1938, it was the world's first airliner with a pressurized cabin, capable of cruising above the clouds at 20,000 feet, almost like a baby genius, while the others still bounce below the weather like toddlers learning to walk. In total, just 10 units were ever built, which makes the Stratoliner rarer than a Rolls-Royce Phantom on wings. But that was just the beginning, because inside this masterpiece, the design language was breathtaking. If you take a look at its cabin, you would immediately see just how much wider it is than its contemporaries. This bad boy was lined with plush armchairs, sleeper berths, polished wood, and Art Deco lighting. Talk about comfort. For this masterpiece and its passengers, flying wasn't just a chore. It was champagne dinners on linen-draped tables, cocktails in a rear lounge, and fresh meals prepared mid-air on electric stoves. Each seat could recline like a throne, and you had stewardesses who didn't just serve you, they pampered you. Every single detail whispered exclusivity. Not to mention, passengers even forgot there was ever a thing called turbulence, because its altitude and pressurization made it smoother than silk. It wasn't economy or even first class. The Stratoliner was aviation royalty. Used by Pan Am and TWA, the Boeing 307 Stratoliner connected cities with style and set a new standard in commercial aviation. From its B-17 bomber roots to its gliding silver silhouette, the Stratoliner was less of an aircraft and more like a flying gentleman's club. If we were going to crown an aircraft of the golden age of air travel as king, the Boeing 307 wore it like royalty. If you think it's a shame that you didn't get to experience it, well, I've got good news for you. You could still get on the only one that still flies, and yes, it's a national treasure. But if you think this is all the luxury vintage planes had to offer, you'd better strap in for the next one, because it's a doozy. Connie, as she is known to her admirers, wasn't giving you an experience in just flying. Oh no, this was beauty takes you time traveling to the golden age of aviation, when airliners were catwalks in the sky and legroom was measured in feet, not inches. The Lockheed Constellation was born from a 1939 meeting between Lockheed's Kelly Johnson and the super fancy Howard Hughes. The Connie wasn't just designed, she demanded to be the most beautiful luxurious bird that was ever built. With her sensuous dolphin-shaped fuselage, triple tail, and the 4 roaring radial engines she was outfitted with, the Constellation would slice through the sky at 300 miles per hour, carrying up to 100 passengers in her splendor. And when we say splendor, we absolutely mean it. Beginning from 1946 onward, airlines like TWA and Pan Am turned their cabin into a flying hotel suite. She had deep leather seats, velvet drapes, white linen dining service, and even a cocktail lounge. And sometimes there were even live piano performances mid-air. And don't get me started on the food. We're talking lobster thermidor served with a side of altitude. And the stewardesses wearing custom designer uniforms, ensuring your every need was met with a smile. Happening at a time when transatlantic crossings would take days by ship, the Connie did it in under 18 hours. And quite frankly, she did it with infinitely more flair. Whether it was her berths for sleeping, the in-flight cigars, or maybe even the metallic gleam that made photographers swoon, the Lockheed Constellation wasn't just an aircraft. It was an airborne theater, and today she has become a vintage icon, proof that luxury once had wings. Nicknamed the Queen of the Skies for a reason, the Boeing 747 was basically an airborne palace with wings. The jumbo jet, as it was also called, was launched in 1970 by Pan Am. This double-decker behemoth turned transatlantic flying into a red carpet affair. I mean, this is a plane with a spiral staircase that leads to an upper deck lounge with velvet seats, real cocktails, and again, a piano bar on some Pan Am flights. At this point, the first-class flying of today was more or less economy back then. That is, if they even knew the concept of something not luxurious. They weren't just flying, it was practically a club in the clouds. The main deck of the 747 was spacious and was used to host fine dining. It also had sleeper berths and more legroom than a modern business class. Airlines like TWA and Qantas typically styled their cabins with mood lighting, wood paneling, and designer touches. Singapore Airlines even used silk. To add to the sheer insanity, passengers dined on filet mignon with real silverware, while sipping Dom Pérignon above the Atlantic. But here's the thing, opulence aside, the 747 absolutely stunned engineers. Standing at over 230 feet long, with 4 engines roaring with 46,000 pounds of thrust each, and crushing at 35,000 feet with over 450 people on board. The jumbo jet was designed for both opulence and scale, a blend that's rarely seen again. But this wasn't just luxury. The 747 made long-haul flying more accessible and widely available, allowing the masses to fly while the elite lounged upstairs. The hump it carried wasn't just for show, it symbolized an era when flying was an event, not a chore. And today, the vintage 747s are either museum pieces or VIP jets. But their legacy was untouchable. The 747 was the experience. Practically a spaceship and a necktie, the de Havilland Comet debuted in 1952 with BOAC. This wasn't just the first commercial jet airliner, oh no, it was the original Flex. Cruising at 40,000 feet while piston planes were still wheezing at 20,000, passengers on the Comet would step aboard what looked like a Cold War rocket with curtains. It had sleek aluminum skin, panoramic square windows, well, a little too square, which we will get back to soon enough, and the hum of jet engines that whispered you were no longer in Kansas. On the inside, it had plush 2x2 seating with enough legroom to cross your legs twice. Pastel-toned cabins with polished wood accents and soft lighting that made even a bumpy ride feel like jazz. Spending time in the drawing room in the Sky Lounge, the elite sipped on gin mid-flight while they were halfway between London and Johannesburg. And unlike today, the meals weren't even heated in plastic. Nope, the BOAC served full silver service dining with white gloves. So, what exactly happened to the ever-so-iconic Comet? Well, unfortunately, the Comet's reign was a tragedy, and it experienced 3 crashes due to metal fatigue, traced to those beautiful square windows we mentioned earlier. It was then grounded, redesigned, and reborn as the Comet 4 in 1958. Although for a while it regained some of its glory, by then the Boeing 707 had already stolen the thunder. It was bigger, faster, and American. Still, the Comet defined what luxury flying meant during the jet age. The Latte Coeur 631 wasn't simply an airplane, it was an airborne ocean liner, a silver leviathan created for the jet set before there were jets. Emerging in the twilight of the flying boat era, this magnificent flying boat was more than 142 feet long, with a wingspan of 188 feet, powered by 6 roaring Wright Cyclone engines that, in theory, could carry them across the Atlantic smoothly. Stepping inside, you'd see a cabin space unlike anything you would find airborne today. Plush 2x2 seating with 20-plus-inch wide chairs, with sleeping berths adorned with curtains, gorgeous Art Deco wood paneling, beautiful chrome accents, and a lounge bar where passengers sipped cocktails while staring out over the twisting blue. The whole works. This wasn't mass transit anymore. It was a boutique air travel experience for the ambient elite. So much so that Air France marketed it as a salon in the sky. And to be honest, it felt like a flying salon. But here's the thing, trapped underneath the glamour was a flawed design. There were 6 engines which were all unsynchronized and created maddening vibrations. It had no ice protection, and their reliability was at best dismal. Of the 11 that were constructed, a number were lost to crashes. One was seized by the Nazis and another was bombed by the Allies. So yeah, its track record wasn't the best. And after post-war optimism, it was no longer sustainable by 1955. But for a brief moment, one that flickered away too quickly, the Latte Coeur 631 was the French ambition to be master of the skies. An audacious floating cathedral, too late for war, too soon for jets, but always beautiful. Britain had a dream. They were aiming for something grand, a palace in the sky, and that dream led to the Bristol Barbizon, a flying ocean liner from the 1940s that promised caviar over clouds and first-class luxury for every soul aboard. Sounds amazing, right? Now, imagine this, an aircraft that is no longer than a Boeing 747 with a football field-wide wingspan, and within it was an actual movie theater. As if that wasn't enough, it comes with a complete dining salon, actual beds and private sleeping cabins, seats covered in leather that are broader than those in business class today, and a cocktail parlor with elegant mahogany trim where passengers could catch up and sip brandy at 20,000 feet. Carrying only 100 privileged passengers who would revel in ultra-luxurious luxury, this plane had no crowded aisles, no wailing infants, and tragically, no passengers. But why? Well, designed by the Bristol Aeroplane Company for post-World War II transatlantic prestige, the Barbizon was a marvel, packing 8 massive engines, a pressurized cabin, and even hydraulic flying controls, which were years ahead of their time. This plane was a beauty, both physically and from an engineering point of view. But sadly, ambition met reality, and unfortunately, by the time it took its first flight in 1949, the world had moved on. Airlines wanted speed and efficiency, not airborne yachts. The Barbizon was too expensive, too complex, and too early. Only one of these dream works was ever built. It flew, dazzled, then died quietly in 1953, scrapped before it carried even a single commercial passenger. But no mistake about it, the Barbizon wasn't a failure. It was a statement, a luxury legend. And there you have it, from the Art Deco opulence of the Boeing Stratoliner to the Hollywood glam of the Lockheed Constellation. The airborne palace, that was the Boeing 747, the futuristic flair of the de Havilland Comet, and the ocean liner elegance of the Latte Coeur 631. These weren't just planes, they were flying 5-star hotels with wings. They weren't just built to get you from point A to point B, oh no, they were built to wow you midair, with caviar, cocktails, and cabins that look like they belonged in a Bond movie. So if this journey through aviation's golden age got your inner jet-setter craving more velvet curtains, spiral staircases, and piano bars at 35,000 feet, hit that subscribe button and smash the bell like you're hitting the call button for another glass of champagne. Because we've got more airborne elegance, lost luxuries, and sky-high spectacles on the way. Until then, stay stylish, stay nostalgic, and maybe, just maybe, your next flight will feel a little more first-class retro. Catch you in the clouds.